The sun was just beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the endless plains. Dust swirled around Eleanor's boots as she climbed down from the wagon, her hands stiff from the journey. Her heart pounded, partly from the long ride, partly from the fear gnawing at her chest. She had traveled hundreds of miles from the crowded eastern towns, leaving behind a home that no longer existed, a family that had nothing left to offer her, and a life that had been swallowed by misfortune. The ranch spread out before her like a fortress of wood and stone, rugged and intimidating. Fences lined the pastures, and the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the faint scent of horses and hay. Eleanor smoothed her dusty dress and took a deep breath. She had heard stories about the rancher, the tall, imposing man who ruled the land with an iron fist. They said he didn't trust strangers, that he had no patience for weaknesses. And she knew her size would make her stand out, make her an easy target for scorn. Her gaze lifted to the porch, where a figure stood, arms crossed, eyes sharp as a hawk's. The rancher. He watched her carefully, as if weighing her worth, and Eleanor felt the sting of his scrutiny. She swallowed hard, fighting the tremor in her hands. I can cook, she whispered, almost to herself, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. And I work hard. I can do anything you need. The rancher's expression didn't change. A gust of wind tugged at Eleanor's hair and dress, and she braced herself against it, feeling small under the vast sky. We'll see, he said finally, his voice low and cautious, more a statement than a welcome. Eleanor nodded, forcing a smile she didn't quite feel. She lifted her chin and walked toward the barn, determined to prove herself. The dust of the plains coated her skin, the weight of the wagon ride pressed on her shoulders, yet she felt a strange thrill, a mix of fear and possibility. This land was harsh, and so was the man who ruled it, but maybe here, she thought, she could carve out a place for herself, one meal, one chore, one day at a time. The wind carried the scent of earth and horses to her, a reminder that life on the ranch would be unforgiving. But Eleanor squared her shoulders, determined to meet it head-on. She was no delicate flower. She was a survivor, and she was ready to fight for every ounce of respect the ranch would give her. By sundown, the ranch was bathed in a golden-orange glow. Eleanor had spent the afternoon gathering firewood, mending a few fences, and preparing for what she hoped would be her chance to prove herself. She wiped her hands on her apron, her palms rough and calloused from the chores, and glanced toward the kitchen window. The stew simmered gently, the aroma of tender meat, fresh herbs, and earthy root vegetables curling into the air, mingling with the scent of the plains. The rancher stepped into the dining area, his tall frame filling the doorway, boots still dusty from the pastures. He looked her over, her round cheeks flushed from exertion, her clothes wrinkled, her hands bearing the marks of honest labor. Eleanor's stomach tightened. She knew the whispers in town. No one respected a woman her size, and most certainly no one expected her to impress the rancher. Dinner's ready, she said softly, placing the steaming pot on the worn wooden table. Her voice wavered, betraying both nerves and hope. The rancher pulled out a chair, sat down with a grunt, and crossed his arms. Eleanor set bowls and spoons before him, her hands trembling slightly. "Go ahead," she murmured, stepping back to give him space, though every fiber of her being wished he would smile, or even nod in approval. He lifted the spoon, dipped it into the stew, and tasted it with an almost imperceptible hesitation. Eleanor's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. Then, for a long, tense moment, he said nothing. Finally, he swallowed. "Not bad," he said gruffly, his voice rough but not unkind. He paused, taking another spoonful, and his eyes flicked toward her. "Better than I expected." Relief washed over Eleanor in a warm rush, and for the first time that day, she dared a small smile. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Her fingers clenched the edge of her apron, grounding herself. She had come here to survive, not to win favor, but this acknowledgement, felt like a small victory. The rancher leaned back, studying her as she cleared the table. "You work hard," he said slowly. Most would have given up after the first day. Eleanor felt a flicker of pride. She had known this work would be grueling, that her size and inexperience could make her an easy target for scorn, but she also knew she had something they didn't: determination. She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not most people," she replied softly, though with quiet confidence. The rancher's lips twitched. not quite a smile, but a subtle acknowledgement. The bond had not yet been formed, but the first crack in his tough exterior had appeared, and Eleanor sensed the possibility of something more: respect, trust, perhaps even acceptance. As the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars peeked through the dusky sky, Eleanor felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had survived her first real test, and she had done more than just survive. She had made her presence known. Days turned into weeks on the sprawling ranch, and Eleanor's life settled into a rhythm she had never known before. Sunrise became her alarm clock, the crow of the roosters her morning call. She rose with the first light, gathering firewood while the dew still clung to the grass, feeding the horses, cleaning the barn, and tending to the fences. Her hands grew calloused, her arms strong, her back aching from the endless labor, but she endured, driven by a stubborn determination not to let herself be dismissed. The rancher, initially distant and silent, began to take notice. At first, it was small gestures, a nod when she finished a chore well, a rare word of acknowledgement when she repaired a broken fence without being asked. Then came the more subtle signs, his shadow appearing near her while she worked, offering advice without a trace of condescension, or quietly letting her take the lead when a task required judgment. One afternoon, as the sun blazed high overhead and Eleanor tended the herd, the rancher approached her quietly. "You've got a good rhythm," he said, his voice low but not harsh. She glanced up, surprised by the compliment, and found him watching her carefully, as if seeing her for the first time rather than the newcomer he had doubted. Eleanor flushed but held her posture. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "I've had good teachers." She gestured vaguely toward the land, the horses, and the tools. He chuckled softly, a rare, almost human sound, and for a moment, the distance between them shrank. The days were long, filled with labor and sweat, yet Eleanor began to feel a subtle sense of accomplishment she had never known. She saw the rancher smile, just slightly, at her small victories: a horse led safely back to its stall, a fence mended with precision, a meal that satisfied even his notoriously discerning palate. He still had the gruff exterior of a man who had been hardened by life, but cracks were forming, cracks through which trust and respect began to seep. One evening, after a particularly hot day, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind distant mountains. The wind whispered through the tall grass, and Eleanor felt a rare peace. The rancher, silent for a long while, finally said, "You're different. Most people would have quit, or complained. Not you." Eleanor smiled softly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I guess I'm used to proving myself," she admitted, voice quiet but steady. For the first time, she didn't feel the sting of judgment or scorn. Here, in the heat and dust of the ranch, respect had been earned, not given. And in that unspoken acknowledgement, Eleanor felt the fragile seed of something new take root, an understanding between two people who had, until now, existed alone in their separate worlds. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning. The sky darkened without warning, clouds rolling in like a living thing, heavy and restless. The wind shifted sharply, carrying the sharp scent of rain and lightning. Eleanor had just finished hanging fresh laundry when the first thunderclap split the air, sending the horses into a frenzy. Their panicked whinnies echoed across the ranch as they stampeded toward the far fence. "Storm's coming in fast," the rancher shouted, already moving. Eleanor didn't hesitate. She gathered her skirts and ran after him, her boots sinking into the softening earth. Rain began to fall in thick, icy drops, soaking her hair and dress within moments. The horses reared and scattered, eyes wild with fear. Eleanor's heart hammered, but she remembered the rancher's earlier lessons: slow movements, steady voice, no sudden gestures. "Easy now, easy," she called, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. She moved toward the youngest mare, placing herself between it and the broken fence. Mud splashed up her legs as she guided the trembling animal back toward the barn. The rancher watched for a brief moment, stunned, before rushing to secure the gate. Together, they worked in silence, closing stalls, calming horses, reinforcing doors as the storm raged around them. Wind howled through the beams, rain lashed against the walls, and thunder shook the ground beneath their feet. Eleanor slipped once, nearly falling, but the rancher caught her arm, his grip firm and steady. Their eyes met, rain dripping from their lashes, breath coming hard. "You all right?" he asked, his voice stripped of its usual hardness. She nodded, surprised by the concern she heard. "I am. Thank you." When the last horse was secured and the barn doors bolted shut, they retreated to the porch, both drenched and exhausted. The storm roared on, but here, beneath the shelter, there was only the steady rhythm of their breathing. Eleanor hugged her arms around herself, shivering, not just from the cold, but from the intensity of the moment. Without a word, the rancher draped his coat over her shoulders. The gesture was simple, almost awkward, yet it carried more warmth than she had felt in years. "You didn't panic," he said quietly. "You stood your ground." Eleanor looked at him, rainwater sliding down her cheeks like tears she hadn't shed. "I've been running my whole life," she replied. "I didn't want to run anymore." Something shifted between them then, an understanding deeper than words. He saw her not as a burden, not as a woman defined by others' judgments, but as an equal. And she saw him not as an unfeeling rancher, but as a man capable of care, respect, and quiet kindness. As the storm slowly passed and the clouds began to break, Eleanor realized she no longer felt like an outsider. She had earned her place here, not through beauty or approval, but through courage and heart. And in the fading thunder, beneath the clearing sky, an unspoken bond had formed, stronger than promises, and far more enduring.